today. A Redditor makes what Nvidia can't. Hard drives are now dead for gamers. AMD's doing their own thing, and AMD confirms that more cores are coming. Welcome everyone to Gamer Meld. First up for today, it looks like a Redditor actually did what Nvidia couldn't, or at least didn't want to. In a new post by Clashmains2, the user shared images of a mini 3060 Founders Edition GPU that he made. Believe it or not, he actually took a Gainward Pegasus 3060 and modeled the shroud around the PCB and heatsink. Then he 3D printed it off of that, and as you can see, it looks pretty good. Of course, given this is 3D printed in plastic, the fins aren't used to dissipate heat, so it's mostly for aesthetics. Still, he was apparently able to keep it fairly cool, but it was printed in PLA, which gets soft at a pretty low temperature. I can personally attest that it will get soft in a hot car, so he likely needs to make it again with ABS or PETG. Still, this is really cool. And if you want to learn the skills to make something like this, there's no better place than with today's sponsor, Brilliant, a place everyone should go to learn computer science, because let's be honest, there's a reason I trust them. Brilliant was built to teach the STEM field, so you know what they're saying is right. But the biggest reason Brilliant is my go-to is because they teach you by getting you to actually do it yourself. And they do that by using puzzles that progressively add onto one another until you're learning some really complex stuff. For example, I use Brilliant to understand how modern AI uses a neural network to learn. But they have a ton of courses for everyone, whether you're a beginner or professional. And now's the best time to try it because Brilliant's offering my viewers a 30-day free trial when you visit brilliant.org/gamermeld. And when you visit brilliant.org/gamermeld, you'll get 20% off the annual premium. So don't wait any longer. Once again, that's brilliant.org/gamermeld. Next up for today, I've got some bad news for anyone who doesn't own an SSD, or for those who only use an SSD for your Windows install, which I'd argue is likely quite a bit of people. If you haven't heard, another PS5 exclusive, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, is being ported to the PC. The issue is that back in 2020, the creative director for the game stated, quote, "Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart is a game that utilizes dimensions and dimensional rifts that would not have been possible without the solid-state drive of the PlayStation 5. Fast forward to now, and the official PC specifications have been listed for the game. And while you'll notice that it does in fact allow for an HDD, it only shows support for very low graphics settings at 720p. And even here, it still recommends an SSD. Basically, the game is technically playable on a hard drive, but barely. Luckily, it does sound like any SSD will work for higher settings, so a SATA SSD is likely fine. Still, that's a pretty big issue if you ask me. I know a lot of people are claiming that it's 2023, so who doesn't have an SSD? And that's mostly true. The issue is that while a lot of gamers do have an SSD, many of those use it as more of a boot drive with big files like games put on a hard drive. But I'd assume that you have to actually install the game on your SSD, not just have an SSD in your system. Of course, you could potentially move things around to fit it on your SSD, but as we've seen happen with the VRAM requirements, more games in the future will likely do stuff like this. In a recent post that's since been taken down by the company that's porting the game, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart is apparently said to be the first game to utilize Direct Storage 1.2. That's the new direct storage tech from Microsoft that adds support for GPU decompression and should allow games to load much faster. So if more and more games begin using Direct Storage 1.2, you'll likely see more requirements for SSDs. Basically, while you can get by with a hard drive for now, it's only at 720p, so it looks like the fabled HDD is being pushed out. Next up, it looks like AMD will not be following Intel's footsteps when it comes to desktop Ryzen. If you remember a little while back, AMD's CTO Mark Papermaster was interviewed by Tom's Hardware, where he seemed to suggest that AMD would be moving to a hybrid core design for pretty much everything. At the time, we knew about AMD's upcoming Phoenix 2 chip, which looks set to come with the Big Dot Little style design. Well, in a new interview by Tech Power Up with AMD's VP of Client Channel Business, David McAfee, he was asked about hybrid architectures, and in his answer, he stated, quote, "I know that Mark Papermaster talked a lot about different core types coming into our portfolio. I guess what I would say is that as we've looked at different core types, there's probably two things that are overarching factors that we think about in terms of how they fit into the portfolio. One is the notion that P-cores and E-cores that the competition uses is not the approach that we plan on taking at all. Basically, he's saying that their approach is quite a bit different from Intel's in that their cores are completely different, like the E-cores don't have hyperthreading, etc., while AMD C-cores are very similar to their regular cores." He then goes on to discuss the different environments that the cores will go into and ultimately concludes that the power unconstrained environment of desktop PCs don't really need these little cores. Ultimately, it sounds like AMD is wanting to keep these hybrid core parts in the notebook space at least for now, but he doesn't completely take the option off the table. Still, AMD is definitely doing things their own way. And lastly for today, AMD goes over core count increases and what they're doing with Zen 5. This story also comes from that interview with Tech Power Up, where David McAfee was asked about core counts, and in his answer, he goes over the memory bandwidth issues when adding more cores. He ends up stating, quote, "As memory speeds go up, as we have higher bandwidth memory technologies coming into the platform, it's something we're looking at also. I think there will be a point in time where we bring more core counts and more memory capability to our platforms, and they have to go hand in hand. Basically, more cores are coming, and while it doesn't sound all that likely that we'll get a big core increase with Ryzen 8000, it could be possible. Remember that with Ryzen 7000, DDR5 6000 is the ideal speed to run at, thanks to the relationship between memory speed and clock speed. But according to the spec, DDR5 can get up to 8400, and we already have modules at well over 7000. So by the time Ryzen 8000 is released, we should have fast enough memory to handle at least a small boost in cores. Either way, AMD is almost guaranteed to bring more cores eventually. Not only that, but he actually said some interesting stuff specifically on Zen 5 or Ryzen 8000 CPUs. When asked about Zen 5, he claims that AMD is looking to, quote, "bring it into the desktop space as quickly as we possibly can." He then goes on to suggest that Zen 5 will get some big performance gains in terms of IPC and more, and that he reiterates that they are working hard to get it into the market as fast as possible. Ultimately, Ryzen 8000 could be a very serious jump in performance, and it may even include some more cores. Time, as always, will tell. So while that does it for today, are you ready for more cores from Ryzen? Let me know down in the comments below. And don't forget to try out Brilliant for free at brilliant.org/gamermelt. And as always, have a great day.